Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and merry day after Christmas. At least at the time of me recording this, it's the day after Christmas. I don't know, maybe it'll be a few days after when this is uploaded. I'm not really sure. Point is, I know this is late. I'm well aware that this is a late video, as per usual with me though this year. Like, normally everything I do this year is just a little bit later than normal. And as you guys can see, I'm also back from Canada. I wanted to get those videos up as soon as I could. There's some more that I'm going to be filming with her over StreamYard, but I wanted to get those up first just because it wouldn't make sense for me to do like 2 videos where I'm in Canada and then suddenly I'm back here and then I'm back in Canada. That just doesn't make sense, like continuity-wise. That's a big thing for me. I know it doesn't matter as much to you guys, but it definitely matters to me, so that's why this video is a little bit later than usual. But the point is, it is finally here, and I'm gonna stop rambling and get into what we're really here to discuss. But of course, you know, the Christmas season is pretty much over, but regardless, you know, I completed my goal as I usually do. I watched all these Christmas movies. I'm not just gonna not, you know, I'm not just gonna not, you know, pay that forward. I'm not going to have some sort of payoff there. I'm going to take that to my advantage, and as per usual, I will be reviewing every single new Christmas movie that did come out this year, whether it be on a streaming service, whether it be theatrical. I will be reviewing them here. Normally, this is not my favorite thing to do because a lot of Christmas movies these days I just don't think are very good. A lot of them are very just like kind of forgettable for me and not really movies that I would like go out of my way to see. But I have to say, at least in the years that I've been doing this segment, this is easily the strongest batch of the ones I've reviewed. There are actually very few films here that I actively dislike. There's some I don't like at all. I'll say that right off the bat. I don't love all these movies. But the majority of these I actually enjoy quite a bit, and that's really great. So yeah, I'm very excited to be doing this video. Again, I know it's not the Christmas season, but look, I got my Rick and Morty shirt on, I got my Santa hat on, I'm ready for this. So let's just go ahead and talk about some Christmas movies here, starting off with the first one. And just like last year, because the majority of these are Netflix films, I'm going to talk about the non-Netflix films first. Starting off with one I really fucking hate. As I said, I like the majority of these. This one, not at all. And that's Home Sweet Home Alone. And look, going into this, I was very much dreading it. I didn't understand why this needed to exist. Especially when you center on the fact that I'm someone that really doesn't feel like we've ever gotten a good Home Alone sequel. Even Home Alone 2, I'm not really a fan of. I just find it to be kind of just like a retread that tries to go bigger and just does not succeed in the way that that first one did. The first one is one of the best Christmas movies of all time. It's one of the ones I watch constantly. It's the perfect amount of like zany and quirky humor with this big heart to it that you really just latch onto, and I don't think they've ever been able to recapture that same spirit since. They've tried in some sequels, but with this one, I especially just did not understand the point of it existing. I was not at all here for Disney taking this property and just doing whatever they want with it, and especially after watching this movie, I have no idea what anybody was thinking here. First of all, this movie has some of the worst marketing I have seen in a very long time. If you watch the trailer for this movie, you would be led on to believe that this movie is about Archie Yates' character and him kind of going through a similar situation as Kevin McAllister. It kind of sounds like a retread, but that's very much what they sold it as, is that, you know, and we're now focusing on his character. He's part of this, like, British family. He gets left behind, and he has to deal with, you know, some people that are going to rob his house. And that's not at all what we're dealing with here. Archie Yates is not the main character of this movie, surprisingly. Instead, for some reason, the movie decides to switch gears a bit and focus on the couple that is going to be, trying to commit the dangerous act that that eventually will lead Archie Yates to, you know, set off all these booby traps. And on paper, I don't think that's a horrible idea. I get what they're trying to do there, but you really gotta put effort into it. You really gotta get me on board to convince me that this will work at all, because, I mean, if you took the first movie and you'd centered that on Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern, it just wouldn't work. Like, the reason those two characters work so well is because they're kind of incompetent at what they're doing. You know, they're supposed to be these robbers of sorts, and you know, they rob houses all the time, and this is like the next one that they're, you know, going to you know, that basically the McAllister house is basically the next one on the list, and they really want to like take advantage of that, but the problem is they're kind of idiotic. They're kind of stupid, and they have not really put a lot of thought into some things. And again, those characters work as villains. They work as supporting characters. What they would not work as are the stars of the movie, and for some reason this film decides to put Ellie Kemper and Rob Delaney at the helm of this film. They are very much the main characters. They get the most screen time. I thought it was a very strange choice, but that's what they decide to do. And again, like I said, I don't hate the idea of switching things up, but they really needed to do something to make this work, and they really don't. They try to get you to feel for these two characters, understand why they're going to be doing the things that they're doing. You know, kind of get you on their wavelength, kind of get, you know, flesh them out a lot more. But the problem is, in doing so, it really just makes you dislike these characters even more, because even though, yes, they're dealing with like this financial crisis of sorts where they might end up losing their house, and, you know, they need money to sort of, you know, pay things off. They don't want to lose their house. They want to keep it around. The scheme that they involve themselves in is still despicable. They are breaking and entering into a house. They are trying to obtain this doll of sorts that for some reason they feel is gonna, you know, it's gonna make them like really rich, because it's this like weird looking doll that's like this like artifact that they treat like it's this like ancient artifact that like someone's really gonna want. But again, everything they're doing is still illegal. It is very much still wrong. And for some reason, the movie tries to act like they're the good guys in this situation when they're very much not at all. And I don't think the movie does a good job of really getting you on board with them. I still felt like during this movie, like these are very much, you know, the bad guys. They're very much the ones in the wrong here. And I don't think they do a good job with that at all. And Ellie Kemper and Rob Delaney, like, they're not bad in these roles. I do want to stress that. Like, they're not bad in these roles or anything like that. Again, it's just the idea to put them front and center, make them like the stars of this movie. That right off the bat is a very odd choice. But then you throw in Archie Yates's character, who really doesn't have much of one here. They don't really do much of anything with him in this movie. You know, the original film, they do, and I hate to compare because this isn't really a remake. It's more of a sequel of sorts. But in the original film, they do such a great job of, like, fleshing out, you know, Kevin's place within his family, how he really doesn't feel like he fits in. Everyone else is getting more attention. You know, Buzz is pretty much, like, you know, gets attention from the fact and thrives off the fact that he is so just, like, mean-spirited in that way, and everyone seems to really gravitate towards that. You know, you got characters like Uncle Frank who are doing all this shady shit, but then you have Kevin, and he just doesn't really fit in because nobody really gives him that attention. And speaking of attention, that, you know, this film takes it quite literally because it really does not give Archie Yates's character that much attention at all here. He's kind of just like, you know, one day he is not happy with the way that his family is treating him. He decides that he's just going to, like, sleep in the car and they're going to forget him. And that's kind of it. We don't really get any insight into his character. We don't really get to know his character all that well. There's really no, like, fun situations he goes through when he's home alone. It's really just not very exciting to watch, and I think that was sacrificed because, again, the film is making this really stupid choice of centering on these characters, and I think it needed to do both, and it really did it, and I think that very much brings the movie down. But then there's also the fact that this is one of those movies, and I hate saying this because, like, obviously you need a conflict in a movie. You need a conflict, obviously. I understand that. But when the conflict in this movie is so situational to the point where every single sort of thing that these characters are going through, every sort of problem that they're entering, it's all just a series of misunderstandings. A character mishears something, they get the worst possible impression from it for some reason. This is they jump to the worst conclusion possible, and now we have this movie. And really, this is one of those films where if these characters just sat and talked about their mistakes, there really would be no reason for this movie to exist. And so it's just not a very compelling plot in that way. You know, the original film, like, obviously, these guys were just robbing the house, and that's objectively wrong. That's something that, you know, you want to go after. You want to defend your house. But here, there's this whole, like, elaborate scheme that Archie Yates' character thinks that Ellie Kemper and Rob Delaney are behind, which they're very much not. They literally just want to steal a doll. But on top of that, then they think that Archie Yates' character wants to hold on to this doll, and he still has this doll. And it's just like, there's so much going on in this movie that is so utterly ridiculous. But it also is a film that is trying so hard to, like, milk the fact that this is a remake, and we don't really care what you think of it. We're doing our own thing. But the problem with that is that it's not really a remake because, well, Buzz shows up, which will be the only time that he's showing up, because that actor is not exactly good news. That's a whole other story, though. But basically, because of that, you know, this isn't really a remake at all, but there's a lot of winks and nods in this movie to, like, unnecessary sequels. There's a scene where they're watching the film from, like, Home Alone, but it's now this, like, sci-fi movie, and they try to, like, make fun of the fact that, like, the remakes are never as good, the sequels are never as good. It's just, it's so phony, it's so just, like, it's so forced in that way, and I really hated what they did there. And then top it off, this doesn't really feel like a Home Alone movie at the end of the day, because we are putting so much emphasis on this couple, and the movie is trying to get you so hard to, like, feel for them and sort of root for them in that way. This doesn't feel like a Home Alone movie. When those traps come out, they're really just there because they need to be. The only reason that these traps are in the movie is because the movie suddenly decides to just be a Home Alone film, and it just doesn't work at all because none of these traps are really all that clever. They're not that well designed. It all just feels like simplistic stuff, but then they really take it over the top to the point where you have Archie Yates torturing these two for really no reason at all. Like, in Home Alone, Kevin designed it so that way they would kind of get themselves into these schemes on their own. This is nothing that Kevin had to do. In this film, Archie Yates' character is deliberately trying to put these two in harm's way, and it's just not very fun to watch at all. I don't think they did a very good job with that. So yeah, there's a lot of things I really hate about this film. In terms of positives, like I said, Ellie Kemper and Rob Delaney are not bad here. They do have pretty good chemistry, and I think they do a good job with it. And Archie Yates is also giving a good performance in this movie. There are moments in this film where it shows that he can be a very likable lead, and it sucks that he is pretty much overshadowed by this film's ridiculous need to really get you to buy into the couple scheme and what they're doing, which I never really was able to buy into it. I never really was able to, get behind it. I just thought overall, like, at the end of the day, these two characters are still doing something really despicable, and I don't think they did a good job with that. This is just, there's a lot of unnecessary remakes and sequels, like, I think that goes without saying, but, like, this is easily one of the biggest mishandlings of it I've seen in a very long time. I think that there were just so many decisions in this movie that needed to be rethought out, and I don't think they did a good job with that. It's just so ridiculous. It's very irresponsibly handled, and again, because of just how coincidental the conflict is, it just feels so lazy in that way, and I really can't tell what its true intentions are. Like I said, very little of it even feels like a Home Alone film. By the time the third act comes and they try to add in this, like, sort of like emotional heart to it. It just feels forced in that way. Again, it just feels like it's there by design. That's the only reason it's there. It's there so it can be, it's there because it needs to be, just by definition of being a Home Alone film and not really earning any of those moments. So yeah, overall, I really hated this a lot. There's very little about this movie I really did enjoy at all. I think the humor really does fall flat. And I really hope after this film, this is the last we ever see Disney try to do something with this, because it just seems like one of those properties that like Disney took hold of and they just have very little understanding of what even worked about it. And that's why I'm so scared for like if they ever do like say an Alien movie or something like that, because if this is any indication of what Disney is going to give us with these properties that are now theirs, I am really scared moving forward for what's going to happen. But overall, I really hated this a lot. I think this is just the bottom of the barrel in terms of unnecessary sequels or remakes we have gotten. Definitely a D for Home Sweet Home Alone. Like I said, there aren't many films on this list I hate. This is easily one of the worst for sure, and probably one of the worst movies of the year overall. Thankfully, the next one we're reviewing, though, is the complete opposite of Home Sweet Home Alone, in Silent Night, a movie that I enjoyed quite a bit. But I'm not going to lie, out of all the ones I'm reviewing here, is easily the one I can see being the most divisive. And understandable why, because, like, normally when you watch a Christmas movie, you want to be, put in a positive mindset. You want to really get you into that Christmas spirit. You want it to be this film that is just a really fun watch. And I can tell you right now, Silent Night is absolutely none of those things. This is honestly a very hopeless and frankly very depressing movie that I think is just not really going to work well for some people, and not really something you normally associate with Christmas. But for me, it's such a compelling and very different kind of Christmas film that I just couldn't help but really latch onto it. I think what really works so well about this movie is just the realism of the situation that these characters are in, because you get the sense early on that these characters, especially the family we're following, they always throw this Christmas party. This is something that normally happens. This is something they always look forward to. They're trying to do what they can to make it seem as normal as possible, but you can tell just the mood is off. Something is just different this year. The characters are acting very thoughtless. They're really not putting much care into any decisions whatsoever that they make. There's a lot of things they're doing that just seem very irresponsible in that way. And once you start to piece together what's actually going on, this movie really takes off and becomes one of the most compelling watches I think I've seen all year. I mean, what these characters are really dealing with, I don't want to get into too much because the trailer, I think, did a pretty good job at hiding what's really at stake here. All I can say is that there is some sort of nuclear apocalypse happening. I can say that. There's a nuclear apocalypse happening, and the characters kind of have to make a decision as to whether or not they really are going to just, tackle this situation head on, or are they just going to find a way to completely get out of this situation. There's a way that they have been, there's something that they've been administered with to where they can get themselves as far away from it as possible. And I think that's a very interesting dilemma that these characters go through, and I think they do a really good job with that. But what I think works even better in this movie is just the tone of it all. The movie starts off, and it basically is just a very dark comedy. There's a lot of really funny moments in this movie that are so jarring to watch, and you're like, why would this character say this? Like, the kids are swearing like sailors, the adults are straight up robbing banks at points and just having some very intense conversations, I'll say that for sure. But it's really funny to watch at first because, again, you're watching these characters, do all this stuff that they normally wouldn't, partake in things that they wouldn't, admit things that they really wouldn't. And I think they do a good job with that. But as the film goes on, you can sense this underlying darkness. These characters are kind of like avoiding the inevitable. They don't really know. They know what's about to happen, but they're kind of just avoiding it until they really do have to eventually make that decision. And I think that's when this film gets really great, is when these characters eventually have to make that decision. And the places that this film goes, I was not ready for. There's one scene especially. It involves the main family on a Zoom call, and it is easily one of the most emotional moments I've seen in any film this year. It was just so crushing to watch because up to that point, we've heard about what these characters are supposed to do, what they've been told they're supposed to do. But that's really the first time you actually see a character take that action, and seeing it, it is so much more effective in that way, and I thought they did a really strong job with that. But I also like seeing the different points of view from these characters, because not all of these characters are buying into this as easily as some of the others are. Some of them, like, say, Roman Griffin Davis's character, is very much on the opposite end, where he wants to find a practical way out of this. He kind of feels like, humanity did this to themselves, and he wants to do what he can to just kind of see it through, and I really liked his character a lot. He is very much the one person in the group that is probably the most rational. But everyone treats him like he's irrational in that way, and I really liked that about his character, and my God, his performance in this film is fantastic. He proves that his work in Jojo Rabbit was not a fluke at all. This kid is very much one of the best working today, and I just loved what he ended up doing in this film. He has one scene especially where he just kind of gets to a breaking point, and his reaction in that scene I thought was just so well captured, and he did such a great job at really portraying this character that, again, is trying to stay hopeful. He's trying to do what he can to get everyone to come to their senses, but he's within a group that has pretty much been brainwashed at this point and really doesn't really has kind of just like already made that decision, and I thought that he just did a really strong job here. In terms of performance, besides him, he probably is like the big standout of this movie for me, but there's some really strong performances. Keira Knightley is really great here. I enjoyed her performance a lot. She's a very sincere woman who is just trying to keep it together the entire movie, but you can tell that there is really something that is just really nagging at her, realizing how drastic the situation is going to be, the implications of what can happen. You can see how that really just start to get to her. Matthew Good, throughout the majority of this movie, gives a very subdued performance, but he has one scene where he really gets to show off his acting chops, and it was just incredible once it did eventually come up. Lily Rose Depp was a big standout for me in this movie. She's kind of like the one that is sort of like the black sheep of this group. A lot of people like to make fun of her. A lot of people like to pick on her because she's an American, but she's also really young, and a lot of people just easily pick on her, but you also get a much deeper look into her character and her kind of, again, trying to come to terms with what's at stake here. What happens if I don't do this thing that I've been told to do? I thought overall she did a really strong job here. And Lily Rose Depp's character, she kind of strikes up this bond with Roman Griffin Davis because they're kind of in similar positions where they're kind of ostracized from the family because they don't really have the same viewpoints as them. And I found their relationship to be very sweet in that way. They kind of are the heart of this movie. In a film that is so hopeless, there is still some kind of heart, and it is that relationship. And I thought they did a really good job with that. Lucy Punch, I thought, was also really great. Great comedic standout. I knew that she was funny, but she is just fantastic in this film. Again, just the ethical dilemma that these characters are faced with, I think, is just really interesting here and something that you really do find yourselves latching onto. But it really is Camille Davis's directing here that I found to be very impressive, because this is really hard this is a very hard film to direct. You're dealing with such dark subject matter. But yet she finds a way to balance this very dark comedy in there that at points is absolutely hysterical. There's one scene especially where these characters are just kind of just letting it all out. Like, there's nothing holding them back anymore, so they're just like confessing all of these things that they've done, and some of the things that they admit to are just so outrageous, and I thought they did such a great job. I thought that her directing was just so strong here. I really do want to see her direct more movies moving forward. I believe she is, in fact, Roman Griffin Davis's mom, and she definitely does have a future in her. I thought she did such a great job at balancing, like I said, this darker comedy with what turns out to be a very depressing film. I really liked the way that they did that, but then diving deeper into the family dynamics, I mean, this is not exactly a very likable family. There's a lot of, frankly, horrible people we're dealing with in this movie, but the movie recognizes that they're horrible. That's where some of the comedy comes from, but that's also where a lot of the conflict comes from, because there's a lot of things these characters have done that they have not really been able to confront until now, and I thought they did a really great job with that. My only issue is some of these things these characters admit to, there's not exactly a lot of resolution to it, but it makes sense because, you know, we're kind of in a situation where these characters don't have a lot of time left and they kind of have to struggle with this decision, so they're not really focused on, like, fully coming to terms with it. They just kind of, like, brush it aside, but I think there were some things they could have dived a bit deeper into when it came to those conversations overall, but there's still a lot of funny moments there, and I thought they did a strong job with that. But like I said, in the midst of all that, there is still some heart in this movie, and that really is geared towards that relationship that I talked about, which I found to be some of the strongest moments of this entire film. The opening scene as well is probably one of my favorite opening scenes of the entire year. It's just all of these characters, and they're all listening to this song, but they're experiencing it in such different ways. And you know, just from this opening scene, like, it seems like something is a bit off kilter. The way the characters are acting, it just does such a great job of creating this atmosphere that only looms more throughout the movie, and I thought they did such a strong job with that film. The movie also gives you a lot of answers very slowly. It doesn't try to present it in a very, like, showy manner, because again, the way these characters talk about it, it feels so nonchalant. Like, they know what's at stake, but they're just kind of, like, talking about it very freely, and it's very, that's what makes it so hopeless to watch, is when you realize the way these characters are talking about it. I thought they did such a great job with that. There's so much great social commentary here as well about how these characters have kind of caused this situation, but now their children kind of have to deal with it as well, something that they were not responsible for, and they kind of have to take on this burden. You know, how is it going to affect them? What are the stakes for future generations and things like that? This movie really does dive deep into all of those questions, and I think it does it very well. But my God, the third act of this movie is just so heartbreaking to watch, and it left me so speechless with the places that it ended up going. The final shot of this movie is so stunning to watch. Just in general, this is a film that it's not going to be for everyone. It definitely doesn't give you that Christmas cheer, but I think it represents Christmas very well because of this family being together and basically them having to make this decision, and in a way sort of, you know, representing a different side of Christmas. I thought they did a really great job with it, and I do think this could one day be a scenario that could actually maybe happen if things continue to go in the way they are. And I thought overall this film got its message across very well. It's got a very talented cast, some legitimately very funny moments. Silent Night really worked for me. My only real flaw with this movie is that I do think there are some characters that just don't really have a lot to do, particularly Kirby Howell-Baptiste. There's a really fun joke with this song that she likes that you can tell that Lucy Punch wants nothing to do with, and I thought they did some fun stuff with that. But aside from that, there just wasn't really a ton to her character, and I wish they could have dived deeper into her. Annabelle Wallace kind of has this subplot as well that I just didn't really feel got enough focus. That family in particular, I didn't feel got enough focus. Her and also Rufus Jones, I felt just did not get as much focus as they really needed to, but the characters that are great are really great, and the film does put a lot of emphasis into them. There's some really strong performances here. Like I said, it's definitely not going to be for everyone, but it's a film that very much did work for me, and I found to be very compelling viewing, and ends in a way that is just so soul-crushing in the best ways. Of the ones I'm talking about here, this is very easily the best of the ones here. I think this is just such a different, but such a welcoming Christmas film that's definitely not going to be for everyone, but one that I very much did enjoy quite a bit. So B+ for Silent Night. Again, very dark, very depressing, not at all the type of, you know, cheerful Christmas film you want to watch, but I think overall does a really good job of hammering home its message and really telling this very different story that I think overall it gets across very well. So I very much enjoyed this one. And the last one I'll be talking about of the non-Netflix movies, of course, is 8-Bit Christmas on HBO Max. And this one I enjoyed quite a bit. Now, yes, a lot of people can say, oh, this film, it's really just like weaponizing nostalgia of the 80s, and it's just trying to cash into that, but I felt like this movie was a little bit more than that. It has some similarities to like A Christmas Story in the sense where it kind of centers around this kid who wants this one thing. Nobody really seems to want to get it for him, but he's doing everything in his power to do so. But you also have a bit more heart to it than I think that movie did. A Christmas Story is much more just like a series of misunderstandings, and I wouldn't really say that's what this is at all. I think what this film does a really good job with is, first of all, it is a lot of fun to watch this whole sort of dynamic. We've been here before, where you really want something for Christmas and it just seems like it's completely unattainable, but you continue to push for it, and that's exactly what the kid in this movie is doing. He wants this Nintendo very badly. Everyone seems to kind of just push against it, or they don't have the money for it, and I thought overall that was a really fun goal. I enjoyed following this character, and I think Winslow Fegley does a really good job at playing him. I thought that he was just a lot of fun here, and again, he continues to be a really big standout in pretty much anything he's in for me, and I think he did a good job in this film quite a bit. I also enjoyed all of his friends in this movie as well. They're a very fun group to follow. I thought that they were just a lot of fun here. There's a lot of fun characters that we do come across in that group, especially Che Tafari. I've never seen him before, but he was hysterical in this movie. He has a lot of moments towards the end especially that really did have me cracking up, and I think they do a really good job with that. But underneath this sort of seemingly selfish story of just this kid wanting this present, there's a really sweet story about a father and son trying to reconnect, because it's one of those films where he doesn't really understand his father. His father is like building stuff a lot, and he doesn't really understand that passion that he has, and his father doesn't really seem to understand a lot of the passion that his son has. And I really like getting to see these two just kind of work things out and slowly get to understand each other more. And Steve Zahn is just so good in this role. He's so funny here, but he also brings a lot of heart. You can tell this is a father that generally does care for his son, but is just having a really hard time in kind of finding ways to fully connect with him, and I thought that's something that the film did do a really strong job with, and I think that really does work as very much the heart of the movie here. And also paralleling that to our main character and him in the present day with Neil Patrick Harris and his daughter, where his daughter really wants this cell phone, but you can tell that he is trying to tell her this story to instill this message in her, to get her to maybe reconnect with him in a different way. And I think the film does do a very strong job with that. Like I said, there's a lot of very funny moments in this movie. Really, my only flaw I would say with this film is that I do think the movie does get a little bit ridiculous in the third act. It kind of dives into like, oh, video games are gonna brainwash your kids and things like that, and we've seen that done before. This film really does kind of play into that a little bit. It's not the message of this movie or anything. Obviously, the film is very much like kind of making fun of that, but I wasn't a huge fan of that. And I do think the actual message of this movie, like the ending, is a little bit questionable. I'm kind of just like, I don't really know what they're trying to say with that, but I still thought it was a pretty sweet and endearing ending, and I liked the way the film overall did wrap up. Also, I do think there are some characters that just don't really have a lot to do, like June Diane Raphael is in this movie. She plays both the present day version of his mom, but also in the flashbacks, and she does a really strong job in both of them, but just doesn't have a lot to do here, and I wish they could have done a little bit more with her in this movie overall. I think that would have made the film that much stronger as a whole. But overall, I enjoyed this. I think Michael Dowsey did a really good job at directing this film. He definitely gave it a lot of effort. He put a lot of heart into it. It is far better than his previous effort for sure. I think this is really where he thrives, is these kind of like just fun comedy films that also have a bit more nostalgia to them. I think he does a really good job with that. So overall, overall, I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think it's a really fun Christmas movie, so B for 8-Bit Christmas. I do think there's some things that are a little bit questionable, but overall, I had a really fun time with this one. Alright, so now we are going to go into the Netflix one, starting off with one that I was honestly really pleasantly surprised by, In Love Hard. I went into this kind of thinking that it would just be like a generic romantic comedy. It wasn't really going to be anything that great, but I gotta say, I think this film works a lot better than you think it would, and what I think works really well about it is that it recognizes that these characters are flawed. Both of our characters here that we're dealing with are very flawed. Nina Dobrev's character, she basically runs this blog, but it's not the kind of blog that you normally see in movies. It's literally a blog where she goes on dating sites and basically does it in an effort to report on them and report on how the person was and how the date went and things like that. That's basically her entire job. And one day she stumbles across this one guy that she seems to get really close with and literally decides to meet him like 2 weeks later. That's insane. And in any other movie, like, we would be the one calling her out for it and be like, why would she do this? This is really dumb. Like, I can't overlook this. Like, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief in that way. This movie actually does call her out for it, and I really liked that a lot. This movie recognized that, like, this is not really a smart thing to do, that she should have given it more time and things like that, and I really did enjoy that quite a bit. But then, on the opposite side of things, you have the guy that she's talking to does turn out to be a catfish, but not for malicious intent. He has a much different reasoning behind it, and I think that's something that works really well in this movie. Like I said, is that both of these characters are inherently very flawed, and that's one of the reasons why you really do latch on to both of them, because the movie acknowledges that these aren't perfect people. They've both made, their own fair share of mistakes, and I really like seeing that. I like when a film, calls out its characters and doesn't try to pretend that these characters are perfect. It's honestly really refreshing to watch, but it also helps that Nina Dobrev and Jimmy O Yang have really great chemistry here. You latch onto them very quickly. I think they work very well together. Dobrev in particular is spectacular in this. This might just be the best performance I've ever seen from her. I really liked what she did in this film. I think she gives the character of Natalie a lot of layers here. You understand why she cares so much about this relationship, but then on the other hand, she's lying to who she actually thought the guy was. The actual guy that she thought she was talking to is named Tag, and this is the guy that she really wants to pursue, but she basically lies to him throughout the entire movie. So it's a very complex situation where you have this, budding relationship between her and Jimmy O Yang. Meanwhile, she's trying to get with this other guy, but the movie doesn't do it in the shallow way that you would expect. It actually takes a long time for her and Jimmy O Yang's character to really like each other. For a while, they're just kind of going along with it because O Yang's character doesn't really want to fess up to the fact that he is single and doesn't have a relationship. He's kind of like pressured by his family to have someone, and I think the movie does a really good job with that. There's some clashing with like his brother and things like that I thought worked really well. And like I said, I think O Yang as a character is really well done. They could have portrayed him in like a very like vindictive manner, but you get the sense why this guy has done what he's done, and that's very hard considering the things that he did. It's very hard to get behind that, but this movie does enough to where you're able to fully buy into that, and I think they do a good job with that here. The movie also is very funny. There are a lot of moments here that very much did have me laughing, and I thought they did a good job with that, but the movie also gets surprisingly very tense in its third act. Like, I was honestly surprised by how by how tense I was getting at certain parts. The third act especially, there's this party that goes on, and you feel the anxiety, you feel the weight of what Natalie has to deal with. What starts off as this little lie just keeps springing into something so much bigger, and you're just kind of waiting for her to like explode, and it's so well handled in that way. So again, I think the film is generally very well written, more so than you really would expect for it to be, and I think that's something that works really well. I think Hernan Jimenez, he is able to combine this very silly comedy with this very genuine heart very well together. The film is one that's very likable in that way, and I think they do a good job with that. Not to mention, there's some really good Christmas references here. The reason the movie is called Love Hard is because Natalie's favorite movie, Christmas movie, is Die Hard, while Jimmy O Yang's favorite movie is Love Actually, and you kind of see them at first not really understand it, but then sort of bond over it, and there's a lot of great, like, winks and nods to both of those movies, but this in no way just feels like, oh, we're just going to reference Die Hard constantly, we're going to reference Love Actually constantly. It makes sense that these characters would reference those films because they mean so much to them. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed this one a lot. I think my only real issues with it is that there are some characters here that I just didn't really feel got that much focus. Like, Natalie has this friend that she'll sometimes talk to, and I just wasn't a huge fan of her. I felt like she just had absolutely nothing to do. She's kind of just like the comedic relief who's constantly mugging at the camera in pretty much any scene she's in, and I just wasn't really big into that character. I mentioned before Harry Shum Jr.'s character, and I found his character to be not unnecessary, but I just felt they could have done a little bit more with him. He starts off and you think he's kind of like the snobby brother, but eventually you start to realize the care that he has for his brother, and I wish they would have dived a bit deeper into some of that. But really, other than that, I enjoyed this one quite a bit. I think there are some cliches here and there, but for I think what could have been a film that was very like run-of-the-mill, this surprisingly was a lot more likable and actually had a lot more to it than I really did expect. I liked it, again, that we have flawed characters here. The film acknowledges that they're flawed. You have two leads that work very well together. The movie's also very funny and charming. So yeah, overall, I recommend this one. When it comes to like romantic comedies that are Christmas movies, this is one of the best I've seen in a very long time. So definitely a B for Love Hard. Very much enjoyed this one quite a bit. So out of all the movies that I'm reviewing, like I said, there aren't many that I didn't dislike. Father Christmas is Back might just be the worst of the bunch. In fact, I think it very much is the worst of the bunch. I mean, look, the movie starts off and immediately, like, it's off to a bad sign. When your movie starts off with these horribly, like, cheesy opening credits that feel more like something akin to, like, an 80s sitcom, literally down to a T, with everyone just, like, looking at the camera and smiling and posing for it, like, something is wrong here. You are off to a really bad start. And sadly, the movie does not get any better than that. This is just such a horribly written comedy that just does not really work at all. I'm gonna give a comparison to a film I just talked about called Silent Night, and the reason I'm gonna compare it is because both of these movies focuses on these very like horrible rich people, and these like horrible rich people that aren't necessarily the most likable characters. But I think in one film, while the movie is deliberately making them unlikable so it can kind of like make a point, this one focuses only on them just so they can be really funny and obnoxious, and it just does not work at all. There's so many characters here that I just couldn't stand. Elizabeth Hurley especially, I really hated in this movie. Her entire character is just that she's snobby and she doesn't understand, why people that aren't rich do the things that they do, and I really couldn't stand her at all in this movie. There's like a guy that she's pursuing that she keeps making fun of, like his weight. There's like a lot of fat shaming there, and I didn't like that at all. Really, none of the characters to me I really latched onto in terms of these sisters. The only one I gravitated towards, believe it or not, is this character that is obsessed with the Beatles. Well, in the midst of all of this chaos, all she cares about is writing this memoir about the Beatles and like their legacy and her love and passion for them, and there's something that's really like endearing about it that you really do find yourself latching onto, and I think that character worked really well. But virtually every other character in this I could not stand, and of course, I am talking about Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey Grammer is still a big problem with this movie. He does give a strong performance, I will say that. He put a lot more effort into this movie than he really needed to at all. I think he had a lot of emotional beats that were very genuine. It did not feel like he was phoning it in at all, which is the complete opposite of, say, like John Cleese, who did not give a fuck in this movie. He was sleepwalking throughout the entire thing. Kelsey Grammer actually does put some effort into this, and I will give him that. I will give him the fact that, like, yeah, he put effort into this, and that's really great. I like that Kelsey Grammer actually went out of his way to put more effort into the movie. I just don't understand why this is the movie that he ended up doing, because, my God, I mean, the character he's playing is so cliche. It's literally just, oh, I was an absentee father, I wasn't there for my daughters, and I'm trying to, like, make it right again. But the problem is, this film recycles the same scene with him over and over again. The daughters, like, want nothing to do with him. They're very standoffish. They want him to go away. They don't understand why he's back in their life. He tries to apologize for it. It seems like they're gonna warm up to it. But then the next scene goes by, and it seems like that previous scene didn't even happen. And it's like just a rinse and repeat. And it's like, what is the point of constructing a narrative here when you're just going to be doing the same beats over and over again? And that's very much the case with this movie. When it's not doing that, it's doing this horribly obnoxious comedy that I just could not stand at all. Everyone in this movie is always acting over the top. Everyone in this movie is so cartoony. There's this really bad subplot with one of the sisters and their husband thinking that they're cheating because she's not having sex with him or something like that. I don't know. It was really stupid. I really hated pretty much everything going on in terms of the story here. The comedy is terrible. The look of this movie literally looks like a BBC like comedy show. Like, it's so badly done. It looks like an episode of Doctor Who or something like that. And not say Doctor Who's bad, but like BBC shows have a very specific look to them, and this does not look like a movie. It looks like a TV pilot, and I just really didn't understand the cheapness of this at all. I think the score is really bad here. Just everything about this. It is easily one of the worst Christmas films Netflix has really ever put out. I say this constantly, but they are so incredibly like hit or miss when it comes to films. And like, while there's a lot this year they put out that I actually enjoyed quite a bit, this is one where I'm just kind of like, why? Like, why is this a film you needed to acquire? Why is this a film that you felt like, oh, this needs more viewership. This needs more people to talk about it. You know, we can really get a lot of people to like this movie. I just don't really understand, you know, the appeal to this film. I don't really understand the mindset in acquiring this film. It just doesn't make sense at all to me, because this is just such a stupid comedy that I did not like at all. It has some of the most emotionally forced beats I've seen in a long time. Kelsey Grammer gives a good performance, as does the woman who played, I think her name was Pauline. I enjoyed her quite a bit. But aside from that, I mean, this was just absolutely unwatchable throughout. Such a dreadful experience. Definitely a D for Father Christmas is Back. I really hated Home Sweet Home Alone a lot, but this is just a little bit worse than that, because at least in Home Sweet Alone there's some good performances there. Here, there's very little about this I enjoyed a lot. There's very little bit about this that I actually ended up enjoying. This is easily one of the most miserable experiences I've had with any film this year. Just don't watch this one at all. Like, some of these are really good. Stay as far away from this as possible. This is really bad. Oh no, here we are talking about another Princess Switch movie. For some reason, they continue to make these films. I don't understand why, especially after how bad the second one was. I really didn't think we were going to get another one, but here we are. I have to say, though, this one really isn't that bad. I didn't hate this film very much at all. I know it's really shocking that, like, the third movie is somehow the best, but it really is. And I think what works really well about The Princess Switch 3 is that finally we actually have some compelling character work. You know, the character of Fiona that I really hated in the second movie? That character gets a major upgrade in this film. This basically is her movie pretty much the entire time. We focus a lot on, like, her childhood and what's really made her this way, why she is so selfish, why she's very, like, neglectful towards people, but also why this has kind of gotten her to sort of push away from any sort of, like, romantic relationship. She doesn't really want any of that in her life, and it adds a lot of dimensions to her character and actually makes her probably the most well-fleshed out character we've ever had in this series. And I can't believe I'm saying that for a character I really despised in the previous movie. She was easily the worst part of Princess Switch 2, but she really does a great job here. And I don't know if it's just Vanessa Hudgens' performance that's more convincing this time around, but my God, I mean, I really liked what they did with Fiona here. I liked seeing the flashbacks. I liked the way all of that was handled. I thought they did a really good job with her. The problem is, while Fiona is very well developed, it kind of just reminds you that virtually every other character in this film is nothing. And especially in this movie, I mean, while Fiona has a lot to do here and is given a lot of great character development in this movie, Stacy and Margaret have almost nothing to do here. They're pretty much just caught up in this sort of scheme that's going on. Most of this film focuses on this jewel thief, and basically they have to try to track this jewel thief down because it's going after like this priceless relic that they need to like keep around, and basically it starts off this whole scheme. I don't know, the plot of this movie is really dumb. I did not care about this jewel heist at all. I didn't care about what was going on. I didn't care who it affected. Just none of that really mattered to me. It really is just here so we have something for these other characters to do, but in doing so, they really don't have much to do in this movie at all. Stacy especially is just kind of here to like concoct schemes and kind of help out when she needs to. And then Margaret, her entire plotline is that she's trying to trust Fiona more. She's trying to get more on her wavelength and things like that. But they really don't do much with either of those characters, and especially when it comes to their husbands. I mean, they don't do anything with them at all. Kevin is nothing to do, neither does Edward, and I just, again, I don't care about any of those characters, and that does not change here very much at all for me. The villains in this movie are also really leave a lot to be desired. They're very forceful with the way they go about it. It's so obvious what's going on from like the second that they're introduced, and they really don't do a good job with integrating them into the story in a natural way at all. But I will say there were some legitimately funny moments here that did make me laugh, and I can't say that about the other two entries. The other two entries I absolutely despise, but this one I actually was laughing at a few moments. Not the whole movie, obviously. But at quite a few moments, I did actually find myself laughing. I think the movie, it takes itself a lot less seriously than the last one, and I think that actually does help. But again, there is an attempt to tell a more focused story, and I did appreciate that because the last one was so fucking messy and didn't know what it wanted to be, and I think they do a good job with that. So overall, I think this one is better. But then there's still a lot of things that just don't really work. The bland characters that have been the center of this film, it really doesn't improve upon them at all. The film also is still very cheesy, and that's something I just can't really get behind. There's one scene as well that also, it's so perplexing to me. There's this recurring gag with Fiona and her crossing the wires in like the bank because she's the one that's like able to do it. And they do this really weird scene with her with like these lasers and this like music in the background that is borderline like porno music. And I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that scene, but it did not work. I don't know what they were going for with that, but it was a very, very out of place scene, and just nothing about that really worked at all. But like I said, the fact that I can sit here and say I did not hate a Princess Switch movie, I think is very much an improvement. They are starting to get a little better. I think they're recognizing what works in this franchise and what doesn't, and that's something I really do appreciate. There's still a lot of stuff I don't really like, but I appreciate the fact that this one did try to do something different. This one did try to focus more on Fiona as a character and actually made her the best character of the entire series. So yeah, didn't really hate this one at all. I do think it's still quite forgettable, especially because of the jewel heist and things like that, and really not really doing anything with the other characters. But definitely an improvement, and I will definitely give it that. I think this is definitely the most watchable in the entire series. I can't in any way call it a good film, but it's a passable one for sure. So C for the Princess Switch Romancing the Star. I really didn't hate this one very much at all. I can't believe it either, but yeah, I didn't think this was a terrible film. A Boy Called Christmas was actually the one I was most looking forward to of the Netflix films this year, and I will say this movie's not as good as I wanted it to be, but it still is a pretty good film. I just don't really have a ton to say about it. I will say it's very imaginative. I think the cinematography especially is fantastic here, the look and feel of everything. You know, this seems like if the North Pole, you know, was a real place in the way that it's been described. I think this is pretty accurate to what it would look like, and I think they overall do a pretty strong job with that. I liked the look and feel of everything. I liked going through this world. I think the world building is very strong, and I think they do a good job with that. There's also a lot of great performances here. Henry Lawful, I've never really seen him before, but I think he gives a really good child performance in this movie. There's a lot of there's a lot of emotions that Nicholas as a character kind of has to juggle, and I thought he handled all of them really well. I really did enjoy his character. I thought that Lawful did a really good job in playing this role, and I think, like I said, he gave a really strong child performance. Kristen Wiig is kind of unrecognizable here, and I really dug her performance a lot. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel, but I really liked her in this movie. She is kind of like the cold-hearted, sort of wicked aunt to Nicholas, and I enjoyed her quite a bit. I think that character did not overstay her welcome. They incorporated her when they needed to, and I enjoyed what she ended up contributing to the story. I thought she was definitely a big standout. Another big standout for me was Zoe Colletti. I've seen her in quite a few things, but she, again, is one of those actresses that anytime she's in, I think she's a big standout, and I think she does a really good job. Jim Broadbent's really good here. And then Maggie Smith narrates the story very well. You really like, you know, how she's narrating the story. They do some fun stuff with her, and I definitely did enjoy that quite a bit. So I think they do a good job with that. Really, the only thing that holds this movie back for me is that I do think there are quite a few characters here that are pretty much underutilized, particularly Sally Hawkins as our villain. I really like Sally Hawkins a lot. I think she's a really strong actress. I think she's had a lot of strong roles, but this role just didn't fully work for me. I didn't really buy into her as a character. I think that she was very underwritten. I think her motivation was a very simple one, and I just wasn't really a big fan of her as a character in this movie. I think that she's really just here so the movie has a villain, and I think they could have done a better job with her. Also, the middle section of this film, I think, does drag quite a bit. I definitely was feeling the pacing after a while, and I think they did need to kind of like pick things up, but it really does pick up once we get to that third act. I think that's definitely when the film does get a lot better. Stephen Merchant is also a really fun character. Plays this mouse named Milka, who bonds with Nicholas, and I really enjoyed their bond in this movie a lot. I thought that they did a pretty good job when it came to that. I think my only other flaw with this movie is I talked about before how Maggie Smith does a good job narrating this film, but the frame story, the present day stuff, I just didn't feel was necessary. It really just feels like it's one of those things that it's in here so we have a narrator, but I really didn't feel the present day stuff was necessary in this movie. I felt like you could have cut it out entirely. Anytime we cut back to it, the movie does kind of drag. It also has this really weird shift in tone where the rest of the movie is taken pretty seriously, but whenever we cut back to the present day, it's done in a little bit more of like a satirical manner, and I just don't think they did a really strong job with that. So yeah, I think they could have done a much better job at giving that part of the film a little bit more of a purpose, because here I just don't think it really works as is. But overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think that's something that a lot of people are going to have fun with. So I recommend this one. B- for A Boy Called Christmas. Not quite as good as I want it to be, but it's a very imaginative and fun adventure that I think overall is very much worth giving a watch. Oh man, we've made it to the fucking generic romantic comedy on Netflix that always comes around this time of year. This time being A Castle for Christmas, and it is everything that I expect it to be. This is one of those movies where, like, you watch the trailer and you're like, this seems like a movie that I'll watch in the background, like when I'm not really doing anything. And so you know what I did? I was on a plane, as you guys know. I came back from my trip from Kamloops, Canada. I was on a plane to Vancouver. It was like a 5-hour flight. I'm like, you know what? This seems like a plane movie, so I'm going to watch it on the plane. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, this is very much a background movie. There's not really much to this at all. The movie starts off in a very bad light. Like the opening scene in this movie, I really was fearing for the worst. It's like Brooke Shields plays this author. She's going on to the Drew Barrymore show, but not really to talk about the book. She's there to talk about the fact that she's killing off a character, and the audience is like in disarray about it, and she has to like defend herself. And I'm like, really? This is the conflict we're dealing with? This is why she has to go all the way to fucking Scotland just to like get away from this? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. But thankfully, the film gets a little bit better from there. But that being said, it did not hold my interest at all. I didn't care about really anything that was going on here. I do think Brooke Shields gives a pretty good performance here. She's a likable actress, and I think overall she does a pretty good job. There's a really generic story going on with her daughter, and how her daughter, you know, there's kind of some tension there because her parents are divorced, and she's not sure if she's going to make it to Christmas, and you know exactly where that's going to go. You've seen this story 1,000 times before. What really holds this movie back for me, and I think what really brings it down, is very much anything we have to do in Scotland. And once we get to Scotland, the movie really does slow down. The movie really does get boring from there. And the biggest issue of all is Cary Elwes in this movie. Nothing against him. I think Cary Elwes is a really good actor, but he is very much miscast in this role. The Scottish accent that he's doing especially is so over the top. He borderline sounds like Shrek in this movie. I mean, his entire character is that he is like the lord of the castle, and he thinks this is all that matters to him. This is as good as it's gonna get. Everything, you know, his entire purpose is to be head of the castle and to make sure that the castle is his, and I don't want anyone else in my castle, donkey. And he didn't say that, but like, again, very much seemed like Shrek, and I kept waiting for him to like have an outburst like that. Honestly, like, if Mike Myers isn't available, just fucking put Cary Elwes in, because clearly he can do a good Shrek impression. But no, in general, I did not like him in this role. I thought that he was very miscast here, and the idea that him and Brooke Shields' character are going to get together, it's just really silly. And at no point is the film really able to sell it. It seems very forceful from the moment that they start to hint at it, and they just don't do a very good job with that at all. So yeah, I really did not like this one. I didn't hate it, but it's very much the definition of like a background movie that I really just don't have any interest in talking about again. I really think that this is like a film where it's like, if you like really cheesy shit that's very forceful, that doesn't really make much sense, that is just not very interesting to watch, I guess go for it. But like, if you want compelling characters, a good story, watch literally anything else, because this doesn't really give you any of that. C- for A Castle for Christmas. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's very much like the most boring of the ones I watched for sure. And the last one we'll be talking about here is Single All the Way, and this one I enjoyed a lot, actually. What I really like about this movie right off the bat is that though this is an LGBTQ, like, romantic comedy, it doesn't really try to hone in on that all that much. It very much just acts like a regular romantic comedy that happens to have gay characters at the center. And I feel like that's kind of the way to do it, because it normalizes, you know, those kind of relationships. And I know a lot of people didn't like Happiest Season last year for that very reason, because they felt like it was acting like, you know, there was something weird, that they had to portray it differently from other relationships. And I can understand why people took issue with it. I was a big fan of that film, as you guys know, but I like the fact that this one is just a little bit more natural about it. It just is, you know, they don't really try to make a big deal, and I think the film is better as a result. But the other thing that works really well is that all of the actors in this film are really good. I think everyone does a really strong job. Michael Urie is very good as the character of Peter. You get the sense that this is a guy that he does want a relationship, but he's just having a hard time like finding someone that he really does connect with in that way. And I think he overall did a really good job in this role. He's very fun to watch, and he's a very likable lead. And the same goes for Philemon Chambers, who plays Nick. I really haven't seen either of these actors before, but I think both of them do a really strong job. They have some really strong chemistry in this movie, and that's something that you really do latch onto even before they start to like hint at the fact that there is a romantic pairing between these two. You really do latch onto both characters, and I think they do a strong job with that overall. So I really did enjoy their, their chemistry throughout the film. I think that works really well. But even Kathy Najimy, I think, has some really fun moments in this movie. The idea that she's trying to be like the most devoted mom to the point where she literally has done like extensive research on, how to treat a, gay relationship and things like that. I thought was just, there's a really funny recurring joke, and I think they do a good job with that overall, and I thought her character was just a lot of fun to watch, but you can tell she's also someone that just kind of wants the best for her son, and I really did like seeing that. I think for, people who are in the LGBTQ community, this is going to be very refreshing for them. There isn't a character in this movie that's like homophobic or doesn't really understand that, and it was honestly kind of refreshing to watch. I liked the way they ended up portraying that here. I liked, especially, like I said, I liked Peter's parents. I liked the way they categorized both of them, and I thought they did a pretty good job when it came down to that, and I think that worked really well. And like I said, I think overall, this story, it's one that is very simplistic, but it's one that you really do find yourself latching onto because there just is a certain charm about it. I think just all of these actors are really fun to watch, but the movie also is very funny. There's a lot of good moments here that definitely did have me laughing quite a bit. I think what does hold this film back is that it does get very tropey. You know from the second this movie starts how it is going to end, and normally that would be a problem for me, that like I know how this is going to end, so there isn't really much of a reason for me to continue watching. But again, the characters are likable, the actors are doing a good job, it's fun to watch, so that's not really an issue. But I will acknowledge that, yes, there are a lot of tropes here, and I would have appreciated if the film took some different turns, went in some surprising directions, because it really doesn't do that overall. And also, the character that Peter is set up with in this movie, in the character of James, I just did not care about here. I did not find him interesting in the slightest. I honestly found him to be really boring. I don't think they did enough work with him to really make this character work. Why would Peter ever like him? And I understand that's kind of the point, where it's like he's not really connecting with him in that way, but I just felt they could have done more with him as a character, but they really didn't, and I thought that he was very much lacking in that regard. Also, I would have liked a little bit more of a look into who these characters are outside of just their romantic relationships, because we don't really get to see that here. We see that Peter, he's like a social media strategist. That's like his job. He constructs like a bunch of different like commercials and things like that. But aside from that, we just don't really get a lot from him or Nick as a character, and I think they could have done some more work with both of them. There is a good subplot though with like his daughters and like putting together like this Christmas show that I really did enjoy, so I thought they did a good job with that. And Jennifer Coolidge was generally really funny in this movie, and they're not often, and that is not something that I will often say, because I think a lot of the time she's just kind of improvising and mugging at the camera, and they don't really do a lot with her. But here she actually had a lot of funny lines. I enjoyed Aunt Sandy a lot. I liked her character being this like extravagant Broadway star that doesn't understand why people are constantly like fawning over her, but seems to also really appreciate it. I really enjoyed her character a lot. She gets some of the funniest moments in this movie. Overall, like I said, I thought this was fun, I thought this was charming, and I thought it was a much better film than I really did expect it to be. Again, this was another one that I thought was just kind of going to be like a run-of-the-mill romantic comedy, but it was honestly a lot of fun to watch. It can get tropey, and I think that does bring it down there, and there are some characters I think are a bit underwritten, but overall, I think this is a very refreshing film, especially for, like I said, people that are in the LGBTQ community. I think they're really going to gravitate towards this film just because of how much it normalizes like those kinds of relationships. I think it does a really good job with that. So overall, yeah, I definitely do recommend this one. B- for Single All the Way. Goes in some very predictable directions, but overall, very fun film. And with that, that's it. Those are all of the Christmas films that I will be discussing in this video. Like I said, I know this is coming out either the day after, at least when I'm filming this, it's the day after, or a couple days after. I'm not sure when I'm going to get this video up. But regardless, I'm glad that I was still able to do this. This is always a lot of fun, and I hope you guys didn't enjoy me doing this video. As always, comment down below, let me know what you guys know of any of these movies that I did discuss. Would love to hear your thoughts on all of them. Hope you guys had an amazing holiday. However however you ended up spending it. Happy New Year, of course, and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot more videos coming your way that I do hope to catch up on in the next few weeks before the year does end, which is really just a week. I don't know why I'm saying the next few weeks. It's confusing when Christmas is on a Saturday. Can we like not do that again? Because it just confuses me. And also when you're like on a trip for like 3 weeks, time goes by very slowly in that way. Time goes by very quickly and you don't realize how little time you have left within the year. But either way, guys, over this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.